Hi guys, and thanks for stopping by the channel. My name is Q, and this morning, man, Sony finally dropped their teardown of the PlayStation 5, and this is something I've been waiting to kind of look at. We saw the Xbox Series X teardown a while back, and they even let some YouTubers like Digital Foundry go hands on it, right? One of the things that was interesting with this teardown is just the size of the PlayStation 5. I mean, this thing's going to be huge. It looks like it's going to be it's probably going to be the biggest system, out there. It looks even bigger than the PlayStation 3, the original OG PlayStation 3 when it came out. But one of the nice things with this teardown is that it looks like it's going to be very easy to disassemble. Like the side panels are going to be able to kind of disconnect pretty easily, which means customization. Remember back in the Microsoft Xbox 360 days with the faceplates? I think this is going to be an opportunity where if Sony doesn't do any type of custom, covers, people like myself and other people that like to do, some tinkering can either repaint it or reskin it. Any way they want. So I think that's pretty interesting. But yeah, no, this system is huge now that we have this teardown. And one of the interesting things, I'm gonna fast forward through the teardown here, is getting into the heatsink and the fan, and I kind of wanted to discuss that. And it's an interesting design compared to the Xbox, and we'll kind of touch and kind of compare the designs based on just my knowledge on things that I've done in the past with building my own PC and setting it up. So it's very interesting to see that both different directions between Sony and Microsoft when it comes to ventilation and cooling. And we know for the most part, the architectures are pretty much the same from AMD. They're using the same Zen type of CPU. The GPU architecture is very similar. Microsoft, has a little bit more compute units than Sony. Hence that's why they're touting, the higher teraflops, which means the Xbox Series X should be generating more heat because of the additional compute units and the GPU power. But other than that, they're very similar architecture. So let me pause here. This is where you're going to upgrade your storage with a aftermarket NVMe SSD. And you will need to, remove the side panel here and get access to this and unscrew this. So it's not too bad. It's not as easy as Microsoft with the proprietary SSD, but it's still doable for most people out there. I think for most of the casuals, it'll be interesting to see if this is more difficult for them or not. But I think the way they structured it, it's going to be very easy to just remove that side panel, get access to where this location is, and then it's there's a little metal cover plate. So the interesting part here I kind of want to highlight is, the SSDs are going to run super hot. They're fast and they're going to run super hot, and they're going to need some type of a heatsink. So from what I'm gathering here is that you have these, it looks like some aluminum plating here. And when you put the cover on it, the cover actually will attach to it. So I'm assuming that this is some type of heat dissipation, way to try to cool down the your extra SSD that you're going to put in. Only time will tell to see if this is going to work or not. Just from my experience and knowing that the faster these SSDs get, the hotter they get, and I just don't know if in the long run this is enough to keep that SSD cool. I think this is going to be an interesting gamble for Sony because, you're going to have more competition and those SSD prices are definitely going to go down. But from the thermal design of it, I'm just wondering if there was another better solution to get this, this SSD a little bit cooler, because the rates that these SSDs will have to run, I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to run super hot. And with electronics, when they run super hot, if they get past a certain threshold, they're going to start to either degrade or slow down. So, like I said, it's overall, this is kind of what I expected, from Sony when it comes to adding an external, NVMe drive. But yeah, until I can get my hands on this in about a month, we're not going to know with our own teardowns and other YouTubers out there that are going to tear this down. A good one's going to, I'm waiting for Digital Foundry to kind of do the comparisons. But I myself, I'm very familiar with electronic components, so this will be an interesting option here. But let's move on. And it goes into he goes into the CPU part of the fan, right? So let me fast forward this. So here's the fan, which is a very sizable fan. So the reason why you're hearing that it's quiet, this and the Xbox, is because the fans are much bigger. So if you have a bigger fan, you're probably not going to need to spin it as much. But what's interesting here is that this particular fan has a lot of fins, and it's because of the design of how the PlayStation 5 is set to introduce air into the system and remove air out. And that's probably the reason why they have more fins here than the Xbox one, where we'll look at the Xbox one later and compare, but the Xbox fan, I believe, only has like 5 or 6 fins compared to this, right? But it's because of the design. If you look at the way the PlayStation 5 sits, it's going to intake air from the front of the system through the side, through the vents or the grills, you might want to say, with the PlayStation 5 in the front and the top. And then what it's going to do is it's going to push all that air, that new cool air, into the system, and it's going to push all that hot air out towards the back, and you can see that with the heatsink later on in the video. But yeah, definitely bigger fans are great because that means it's going to be cooler. It's not going quieter, and it's not going to be as loud. Man, that PlayStation 4 Pro was pretty loud when it started cranking up. When the GPU started cranking up. So you can see here that's where the fan is. He's going to remove the shell. You can see some heat sinks over here. It looks like they're also using the metal plating that's touched on the motherboard as a way to kind of transfer some of that heat, electronic heat, into the smaller heatsink here. And look at the Blu-ray drive. It's a very compact drive, so there's no way this component costs $100. So Sony is eating some costs on the digital version, and they're hoping that they'll make their money from digital distribution, right? So they're going to make more higher profits. So we're going to fast forward a little bit because I kind of want to show and talk about where the CPU is set up. So he's going to remove the plate. So the plate is on the bottom side of the motherboard, so the CPU is on the other side. So that plate's going to at least conduct against, let me pause here. So you see this right here? That's the bottom side of where the SSD is. So when he flips it, you'll see that the SSD is right around this area. So it has a little bit of thermal paste. So it is using that metal plate to conduct and extract some of the heat just from those components out. And you saw the little heat sink here that helps kind of dissipate and cool that plating down. So this is what I was telling you about with that extra slot for for upgrading your SSD, is that the internal SSD is going to be well thermally insulated and cooled, but the extra one that you're going to add in later on doesn't seem like it's going to have that similar protection, and that's why I say only time will tell if it's going to last, and if we're going to run into issues with heat by adding that secondary NVMe SSD to the unit, right? So let me go ahead and play this. And he's going to remove the tension arms there over the CPU. And then what he's going to do is he's going to flip it over to show us the CPU. And all those chips around there is the GPU. So what's interesting here is that you see that, and then all of a sudden Sony swaps out to a clean motherboard. So truly not an actual unboxing, but maybe because from a marketing perspective, they kind of wanted to highlight the CPU. Because this is not what the CPU looks like when you unbox it, because I'll show you. So this is more, I think, from a marketing perspective, they just want to showcase where the CPU is and what it looks like from a clean environment. And then right around the edges there, surrounding the CPU, is the GDDR6 memory. So if you fast forward towards the video, he's going to go back to the original. Okay, before that, here's the SSD on the side of the CPU. So on the back side where I pointed those 3 parts out, 3 components that had the thermal paste, that's the SSD. So the SSD actually is on both sides of the motherboard, and that's their fast SSD, and then that's their memory controller there for the SSD. So again, it's set up in a way where they're going to be cooling those SSDs because it is going to run super hot, and they need to be able to cool it down, because if it gets too hot, you're going to have issues with performance. So later on in the video, he switches back to the original motherboard. So he's just talking a little bit more about the CPU design and the RAM. And then let me fast forward. There we go. Okay, so here this is what the motherboard looks like when you so you see this around the CPU. You need that because they're using liquid metal for contacting the CPU to the actual heatsink. And when liquid metal has gallium, and what gallium does is if it gets onto the motherboard or other components, it's going to corrode it. The other thing that's a little bit of a con with liquid metal is that it actually will corrode the aluminum heatsink as well. So it's going to be interesting to see with the quality of the heatsink that Sony has developed for the PlayStation 5, how long it's going to last. Hopefully they have a lifespan testing of 10 years or more for the heatsink. But again, only time will tell. And if you had to repair a PS5 later on down the road, this is something you have to be very careful about once you open it up and get into the components, because if that liquid metal gets into any of the components on your motherboard, you can damage your motherboard. So that's why they have this around the CPU, and then that's where it makes the contact, because liquid metal is conductive. And you can talk to a lot of PC owners when they're setting up their rigs and customizing it. What are the advantages of liquid metal over thermal paste? And if you look at some of the big mainstream sites out there that do a lot of testing and a lot of comparisons, what you're going to find is that liquid metal will give you anywhere between 1 to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius improvement in terms of thermal. To me, that's not a lot. It's not gonna make or break the operating of the systems, because again, CPUs are gonna run super hot depending upon the architecture. So it's very interesting. Definitely, it's the newest tech when it comes to thermal cooling, but at the same time, there are some drawbacks to utilizing it. So again, only time will tell, but just let you guys know, this is kind of to protect the components around the CPU. As you saw in the previous video before this, they had like a CAN motherboard that had this removed from it, so you can saw all the little components around the CPU, all the transistors. Or the resistors. This particular cushion here is protecting that from the liquid metal. So interesting there. And then again, thermal paste on this side of the SSD and the controller, and this actually aligns with the metal plating on the bottom side. So again, they're figuring ways to cool the SSD down. And that's pretty good. They put a lot of thought and effort into the cooling of the PlayStation 5. And then look at the heatsink here. So this heatsink is huge. And the way it's shaped, let me move over to here. The way it's shaped is the CPU is over here. And all this is also kind of trying to transfer the hot air. And if you look at the back of the PlayStation 5, you have the very long, narrow strip of vents, and this is where they're venting out the hot air. They're trying to displace the hot air towards the back of the console and pushing it out back that way. And that's why you have that vortex fan that's pushing it there. So interesting stuff there with the heat sink, and definitely a little bit more thought into trying to transfer it. The power supply on the bottom is here. There's vents on the power supply to let some air out. Just wondering, how cool does that power supply need to stay? And if it generates a lot of heat, I'm guessing probably not, because now these newer next gen systems are pretty efficient. You'll see with Microsoft, their power supply is pretty small too as well. But you can see some vents here on the power supply, and the power supplies are going to generate some heat. It's going to require a certain amount of wattage to run the PS5, CPU and GPU in the system overall. So interesting there. So yeah, that's the teardown there. So let's compare it with the Xbox. I'm going to use Digital Foundry's teardown of the Xbox Series X to kind of compare the different design comparisons between the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox. So what's interesting here, if you look at the Xbox and where the CPU is and where the RAM is, Microsoft decided to put the heatsink over not only the CPU but also the RAM as well too, to kind of cool down the memory. And that's an interesting and very efficient way to cool the system down, because the RAM is going to get hot as well. And you look back at the PlayStation 5, I'm going to go back a little bit to where he removed the motherboard on this side here. Let me see if I can get to it right here. So you can see the PlayStation 5's RAM there. There's no heatsink on there. There's some thermal paste residue on it, which means that the metal plate that he took off of this to get access to this is what Sony is using to cool it down. And that's why you saw on the actual metal plate before he took it off that there was a heatsink there. So let me see if I can go back here and let me show you. Sorry, I'm doing this all this morning while this thing was hitting. Yeah, so you see this plate right here. After he removes the Blu-ray drive, this plate is sitting on top of the memory, and then that's why there's an additional heatsink here, is because it's using the plate to transfer all the heat to this heat sink, and it's cooling it down. So that's how Sony's cooling the memory. So there is cooling on the memory on the PlayStation 5. Xbox, because they had it uniform very closely, and they made the board freaking pretty tiny. They just plopped the whole heatsink right on top of the CPU and the memory. So it's a very interesting design. Their heatsink is a vapor chamber heatsink, so it's going to help with the cooling. And then also an interesting part here. Let me move over to, and let's talk about airflow. And there was a part here that had a graphics on airflow. Here we go. So this is the airflow, and you see how it's going from the bottom to the top. So let's go back and maybe just pause right here on just the graphics. Let's see if I can do this. Sorry, I'm doing this in real time. Okay, so at the bottom, right? So part of just physics and the way hot air does is hot air rises, right? And you have cool air at the bottom always, and the hot air is always going to be on top. So Microsoft's using this design, and this is why I think the Series X is meant to be stood upright, is that naturally it's going to be able to pull a lot more cool air from the bottom side and the back side of the system, and it will naturally go up. And that's why you see the fan on the Series X with very minimal fins, because it's just using just the physics of hot air and cold air in a room. And because hot air rises, and also what's going to happen is when you generate heat through this heatsink, it's naturally going to create an airflow. When heat comes out of here naturally, even if the fan didn't exist, the heat will rise up. And as it's rising up, it's going to pull air from the bottom. It's just natural, right? So when you throw the fan in there, you're just accelerating that natural behavior of hot air. And because you're doing that, the fan here is a very big fan, and that's why they designed it, this box-looking shape. But because of that, the fins on the fan doesn't need to be the way the PlayStation 5 is set up, because it's naturally pulling it from the bottom and just dissipating it from the top, right? So it's pushing a lot of volume just with the amount of fins that they have from a fan perspective. And let me see if there was a shot here of them showing the fan on the Xbox, and we want to just compare the airflow design of the system, between the two systems. I thought it was very interesting. Here we go. So here, if you look at the fan, let me play it here. You see how there's only 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only 5 fins. There's only 5 fins on here, right? And it's going to help create this vortex, natural vortex, flow. So to cool the system down. So a very interesting thing with the PlayStation 5, what you're going to see is, if you look at this here, right? So you see how this is the top of the system. That's their fan. So their fans is going to need to run a little bit more higher efficiency, because the way they're doing is they're pulling air from the top and the side and even the bottom, and then it's gonna spin, and it's going to push all the hot air to the back side where all the heat sinks are set up. So that's how they're doing this, right? So it's two very different design concepts of airflow, but it's interesting to see how both Sony and Microsoft is kind of looking to reduce the fan noise on their next gen systems and get the heat out. And guys, the latest social media trend on why the Xbox is getting hot. I don't know why people are making that such a big deal. The PlayStation 5 is gonna have some hot air leaving the system as well, and you want hot air to come out of the system, because if you don't have any hot air coming out of the system, it's not cooling the system properly. Those components, the GPU and the CPU, it's gonna generate a ton of heat. All right, and you want a system to be efficient, and if it's efficient, it's pulling all that crazy heat that's being created by these components and removing it out of the system. So you rather have that hot air outside of the system than inside of the system. So it'll be interesting. I think once both systems launch, I think it's going to be interesting to see if there's some test comparison shots if no one else does it. I might do it myself with my two systems to kind of see, because I do have a FLIR thermal camera and I have some other temperature control components that we can run on the system to kind of see what kind of heat it generates under load. So it's yeah, it's this teardown was really good. It was something that we were waiting for, and it's kind of good to see now the components. And from my perspective, since I like to kind of revitalize a lot of my old retro systems back to life due to issues with capacitors and resistors, that the PlayStation 5 looks like it's going to be easy to open up and get access into the actual components itself. But yeah, one of the biggest thing is the whole liquid metal. So yeah, if you're not familiar with liquid metal, I don't recommend you guys, try to break the system apart and try to look into the components if you're not familiar with those type of components when it comes to like the liquid metal, because that you can end up damaging your system. So it's great that we finally got this breakdown of the PlayStation 5. Let me know if you like this video, like it. If you want, subscribe, and I'll create more videos on this. This is more of an ad hoc, unedited version of the video just because Sony just decided to drop this video this morning. So I woke up. I just want to kind of look through the video and kind of compare and see if some of the assumptions I had were correct or not. And for the most part, it's very similar to what I've kind of assumed that they were going in the direction just based on just the design of the PlayStation 5. So yeah, guys, are you excited? What system are you guys getting? Post it down in the comments. Let me know if you're getting a PlayStation 5 and Xbox, or are you getting both? For myself, I'm a gamer. I don't stick flags in any of the companies. I want them to do all well, because if they do well, then we are the benefactors of that as gamers. And if you like Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, or PC, great for that. Just enjoy the games, man. Don't need to stress. Don't need to create all this toxicity that's out there in social media, guys. Just enjoy your games, and glad that these companies are making games for you to enjoy. And if you don't like it, don't buy it. And that's how you voice your opinion, by voicing it through your wallets. If you don't buy a game, then you send a clear message to these companies that they're not doing the right thing. But yeah, other than that, this is going to be some exciting times. I can't wait to get the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox in my hand. And then also I'm going to try to see if I can do some benchmarks on some third-party games running on my GTX 3080. Still waiting for that to get in, but comparing the 3080 with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. So it's going to be some interesting times, a lot of fun times with games that are coming out. So again, thank you for stopping by. Let me know if you like this video or not, and if you aren't a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe, and let me know what other content you guys want me to create. All right, thank you. You guys have a great day. Take care.